Joining us. My name is Ann Risso, and I am part of the Communications Department for Douglas County School District. And welcome to another webinar for Parent University. This evening, we are joined with Christina Howery and Mary Beth Karr. Christina is a school psychologist, and Mary Beth is an occupational therapist, both part of the Child Find Assessment team here at Douglas County School District. Child Find is part of the school district's early childhood education department, and we are excited for their presentation. A little bit of information about Parent University. We attempt to discuss timely and important topics that are going on in the school district and in the community. And we are also partnered with Sky Ridge Medical Center, and we appreciate their support on everything we do with this. The topic of tonight's Parent University is specifically about Child Find assessments, supporting sensory regulation and associated behaviors in preschool-age students. And a quick note, we will have an opportunity for questions and answers after our presentation. So if you can please hold those until we are complete, I will be happy to get answers to all of your questions. And you could submit those during our chat as well as, let's see, a Q&A icon as well. So on that, let's go ahead and get started with Christina and Mary Beth.
All right, we are just going to share our screen here and start the presentation. So tonight we're going to talk about sensory regulation and challenging behavior, specifically with our young children, with preschool-aged children. And there we go. All right, we're going to talk about some possible causes of challenging behaviors. We're going to talk about sensory processing, what it is, just an overview of sensory processing, and then talk about some strategies for self-regulation, for managing challenging behaviors. So to start out with, the important thing to know about behavior is that it's a child's go-to method of communication. So young children, even kids who have strong communication skills, are not able to communicate verbally when they're upset, like all of us. It's often easier and more effective for them to act out their feelings through behaviors. And then when you do have children who have more difficulty with communication, their communication might not be at that typical age level, you might see even more behaviors for sure. So these are just some of those examples of what might be the underlying cause of some of these behaviors. They might be hungry or tired, that kind of thing. Also important to know that a lot of behaviors are just developmentally appropriate. They are not easy to deal with, but they're going to be typical behaviors. So as frustrating as they are, many behaviors are very typical. And so it's always important to have very appropriate expectations for toddlers and preschoolers. Young children throw tantrums when they're told no. They have a limited ability to be patient. They're often resistant to changes or transitions between activities, especially when they're doing something fun. They don't want to stop doing that. Or when they're not sure what you want them to do. A lot of children can be rigid to an extent. They often take toys from friends. They're still learning how to share and how to use their words to get what they want. So they're often frustrated by having limits put upon them. And they often are demanding of attention. And so those are typical, and it's typical to see some of those behaviors pretty regularly. This is just a funny tweet that we saw that just really highlights how it's important to kind of keep those developmental expectations in check, and just highlights that kids really don't have a lot of context for things and everything that's happening to them is new. So we just thought this was a funny example of that. I already talked a little bit about communication. So sometimes we see communicate behaviors when communication is difficult for kids. When children have speech delays, and others have trouble understanding them, this can cause frustration and sometimes behaviors. So this is just kind of a quick chart, but we can share more links to this at the end. But this is just a quick chart that kind of shows you when those sounds come in and what's typical, so that you can kind of judge if maybe that speech articulation is a problem that might need some speech therapy. But again, it might be a reason for some of those behaviors. Go ahead.
So what is sensory processing? It's kind of a nebulous concept, but it's your ability to take in, respond to, and block out stimuli in the body and in the environment. And it includes everything that you see and you hear and you feel and you smell and your taste, as well as in addition to those senses, it's other systems that your body, with that input and that they receive from the world. Things like the proprioception is your body's awareness of movement and how much your joint needs to move. This is the system that allows you to be able to do things like going up and down stairs without looking and without tripping. Your joints know how much they need to bend in order to clear the step every time. Then there's the vestibular system that it gives and receives feedback when you move, and specifically when you move your head around. And then there's interoception. This is the system in the body that allows you to recognize when you're hungry or thirsty or tired, or if you need to use the bathroom. So the question becomes, is the behavior due to sensory processing, or is it behavior?
And the answer is yes, and probably both, because difficulty processing sensory information often results in or presents as behaviors such as tantrums. And other behaviors that might not be caused by sensory difficulties can still be helped or decreased with sensory strategies. They're just very intertwined, and sometimes it's impossible to figure it out. And sometimes, as we're going to talk about later, we can try to find ways to figure out what is causing the behaviors. So our job as caregivers is to figure out what the behaviors are trying to communicate, and finding the reason for the behaviors can help prevent and decrease behaviors. We've talked about typical preschool behaviors and what sensory processing is. So the next step is to figure out when the behavior or the ability to process sensory information is a problem. So it may be a problem if it interferes with daily functioning, if your daily routine is dictated by the behaviors, if your child's school is having difficulty handling the behaviors, if you avoid going in public or to birthday parties or family gatherings because of your child's behaviors or difficulty with sensory processing. Or even if your child's behaviors are not kind of that significant, the tools and the strategies that we're going to talk about are beneficial for all children. At the very end, we kind of talk about next steps and if some of these strategies aren't helping. And these kind of problems might be the ones that you might want to take that next step if these behaviors are kind of interfering with your daily functioning as a family.
So what causes difficulty with sensory processing? We'd like to talk about this because if you Google sensory processing, you're going to come up with some diagnoses that are often associated with sensory processing difficulties. Things like autism spectrum disorder, attention deficit or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, dyspraxia, developmental delays, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder. These are all things that can be associated with sensory processing difficulties. But it's important to know that that's not always the case. Sometimes it's just some struggles with processing sensory input. And this was just an example of some difficulties with sensory processing that we thought nicely demonstrated um, that the struggles that kids have, that adults have too. That if every blueberry tasted and felt the same every time, kids might not reject them because a cracker tastes the same every single time. Um, and so just like no two blueberries are the same, no two children are the same with their food preferences and their aversions. So it's common for kids who are sensory averse to avoid textures, things like mashed potatoes or oatmeal or yogurt. Sometimes those are things that kids can't handle. Sometimes they might seek out additional input. They might really like foods that have a lot of flavor or spice, things like lemons or pickles or salt and vinegar chips or sour candies. They like that extra oral input that it provides, and it kind of soothes that thing that they're seeking. It's also pretty interesting that there's a really natural reason why some kids are kind of picky eaters. It turns out that babies and children have more taste buds than adolescents and adults. Babies are born with 10,000 taste receptors, and as we age, we lose some. Some people lose more than others because by adulthood, sometimes people have as many as 8,000, but they might have as few as 2,000 taste buds. So it's pretty significantly different. But children can detect things like bitter and sour flavors better than adults. And they also have a higher threshold and preference for tasting things that are sweet and for tasting sugar. And everyone has a different threshold for what sensory input that they need and can tolerate. These are just some examples of things that people struggle with. Think they're all relatable. Well, they are for me. I don't know if they are for everyone else. And these are just some common sensory triggers, things that, depending on the person's tolerance, sometimes things are just too loud or too bright, or they're too tired, or people are too close, or everything's moving too fast, or it's too crowded, things like that. Those are some of the things that people struggle with. And so I like to think about a person's ability to process sensory input as kind of a bucket that can hold their input. So when a person is able to interpret and tolerate a variety of sensory input accurately and effectively, we would consider that more normal sensory processing. But some people have a really small bucket, or some people have a really large bucket. And some people have a bucket that seems to have a hole in the bottom and they can't get enough. And so what I'd like to talk about is, what does that misinterpretation of sensory input look like in those types of scenarios? So the first one is kids who are sensory seeking, or they are underreactive to sensory input. So they have a very high threshold. What you might see with a child like this, they might bump into things. They have a really high pain tolerance. They enjoy crashing. A lot of times they seem uncoordinated or clumsy. They have poor balance. They don't really seem to know where their body is in space. Sometimes they put things that are not edible in their mouth because they're seeking more input. They also often stand really close to a screen or put the screen right up to their face because they're looking for more. And they are also those kids that might seek out spicy or crunchy foods because it gives them more input. These are the kids with the hole in the bucket. No matter what you put in, it just keeps falling out and they need more, more, more. Next one is kids that have a tiny bucket. They're sensory avoidant. They're more overreactive to input. So whatever they feel, whatever is presented to them, they can't handle it. They have a very low pain tolerance. They're the kids that they might avoid any kind of input. They might scream when you wash their face. They might pull away from you when you try to hug them. They might have a tantrum when you're getting them dressed. They cover their ears when there's loud noises, and that meltdown might continue for a long time after that noise stops. A lot of times they're pretty anxious because they're afraid of more input. What else is going to come at them in this world? And then they also often avoid foods based upon their texture and how they feel in their mouth. In this bucket, this is a very big bucket. These are kids that don't seem to respond to input quite like other people do. They get overloaded, but they need more input in order to have a minimal response. They might appear lethargic. Sometimes people say that they appear self-absorbed, or they seem disinterested or withdrawn. And you have to really give them a lot of input in order to get them even excited enough to just participate in a minimal activity. And to complicate the matters a little more, most people have different size buckets for different types of sensory input. So, for example, someone might be hypersensitive to sound, but they might be underreactive to visual input. And so they have different size buckets for different input. And it can make it more difficult to pinpoint what exactly the child is reacting to in the environment. One thing that it is important to note is that the size of your bucket can change over time. So a child who is overreactive to one thing, they might not be so overreactive as they grow and develop.
And I made her put that in just because my daughter was very reactive, tiny, tiny bucket when she was younger. She's 22 now. Still certainly has some sensory sensitivities, but much better. So there's always hope. And as kids mature and their nervous system matures, it definitely looks different over time.
It's also important to remember on kind of the same token is that as we develop and as we grow, we learn more coping mechanisms, more appropriate ways to get the input that we need, or to not get the input that we need in some cases. But like, for example, like some people have to take a run before they go to work because they know they're going to have to sit in a meeting, but that's how they get what they need so that they can tolerate sitting for a meeting.
All right. So one way to determine if a behavior is caused by sensory processing difficulties or if it's caused for other reasons is to look for the trigger, for the reason, to see if there's a pattern. So we'll talk about different ways you can do that, but we want to look at when the behaviors occurred. We want to write it down. So you might actually, if you're the kind of person who is a list keeper, and your child is having a lot of different behaviors, start keeping a list, start keeping some data. And we'll talk more about that in the next slide, but just kind of be a detective, because it's not only important to figure out what is causing the behavior so that we can support the kids when they're upset, when they're receiving that input, but it's important because preventing behaviors is much easier than managing them once they've started. So some questions to consider when you're kind of looking for those triggers and those reasons. Is there a common time of day that the behaviors are happening? Is it happening primarily during transitions when you're asking them to stop doing something, to leave the playground, or to stop doing a game to go take a bath, that kind of thing? Transitions are often a common trigger. When did they last eat? Are they hungry? Do they need a drink of water? Who was around the child? Were there a lot of kids, or is it a particular person or child that they're kind of butting heads with? What was happening during the behavior? What happened right before the behavior? Was there a different or new sensory input that they kind of encountered that might have triggered that behavior? So starting to kind of keep some data, maybe every night, kind of look back at the day and kind of start writing things down. It'll help a lot when you're to try to figure out those triggers. And we just can never underestimate the importance of sleep. We see a lot of kids coming through our evaluations that are just not getting enough sleep for whatever reason. So here's just a little chart and some information about how much sleep kids should be getting at different ages. For the ages that we're looking at, toddlers and preschoolers, it's a lot of sleep. So they should be getting over that 24-hour period between 10 to 14 hours of sleep.
And it's also important to know that sometimes sleep can be disrupted by sensory input. You know, a child might, the blanket might bother them, or their pajamas might bother them. The darkness, too bright,
Right.
you know, all of these above mentioned things. So it can be related to sensory.
Some of the impacts of inadequate sleep, same for kids and adults. That's so not a big shock. Difficulty regulating your mood, decreased ability to problem solve, hard to pay attention, meltdowns and impulsive and challenging behaviors all could be because of inadequate sleep. And inadequate sleep might not just mean your kid is waking you up. They could just be waking up on their own and you might not know it. You might think that they're sleeping through the night, but restless sleepers, that could be a sign of poor sleep. Even if it's not waking you up, they might not be getting that full sleep cycle. Some tips for good sleep hygiene, and just overall improved sleep. You might want to make sure that your child's in a quiet, cool, dark, comfortable room. A security object might be helpful. White, brown, or pink noise can be very helpful for a child to fall asleep and stay asleep. Never underestimate the power of maintaining a consistent bedtime and wake time, which can be harder when it's light later in the day, as well as the power of a consistent bedtime routine. And make sure that screens are turned off at least 60 minutes before bedtime for both parents and kids.
So these are some of the strategies and for managing and preventing behaviors that we're going to kind of talk about. So this is just kind of an overview, and we'll kind of go into more detail.
All right. Excuse me. Some of those tips for behavior management. The one really important one is you want to pick your battles, decide what is important and what you want to spend your energy on and what you can let slide. For example, if your child wants to wear a princess dress to preschool, maybe don't fight that battle in the morning. Just let them wear what they want to wear. Distraction and redirection. Preschoolers have short memories, so sometimes you can stop a tantrum by just offering something new and shiny or something that they can have rather than telling them what they can't have. Give them what they can have or give them an option of something they can do. Want to make sure that we're always using developmentally appropriate language. So this serves three purposes. It encourages positive language and decreases how often you're saying no. So if you're saying it in a different way, it often feels better for us and for them than if you're constantly saying no. It encourages developmentally appropriate language. Children don't generally understand negatives until they are around 3 years of age. So saying no and not and none, that doesn't always make a lot of sense to a very young child. So it's easier for them to understand when you're being told to do something rather than not to do something. And it gives them something to do as a substitute for what they are currently doing. You might tell them to stop doing something. They want to do something, so then give them an appropriate thing. So like the example, if you don't want them jumping on the couch, great, let's have a jumping contest on the floor. Let's tell them what to do and give them something to do. Another behavior strategy would be to use verbal warnings. So for when you are transitioning between activities, say something like, in 2 minutes, we will be leaving. And then in 1 minute, we will be leaving. Using simple language is important, as we kind of talked about. Be consistent. If you say that they get one more time down the slide, then follow through. Songs, different kind of music and songs that either you make up or that you have recorded to play, is a good signal that playtime is over. There's a reason that preschools sing a lot because that's a good transition activity.
And there's also visual supports. One of the things that you can do is use a timer. Visual timers, there are a variety of different things available. There are manual timers, sand timers, and there's even digital apps that you can get on your phone that show a countdown. They're pretty powerful. And then using visual supports for choices, providing two options that are available that are perfectly acceptable to you, but it gives the child some control over like their destiny, gives them some choice, and everybody likes to have some choice and control, and kids are no different. And then also using picture schedules. It's a picture schedule just allows the child to see what they need to do. It gives them a sense of accomplishment when they can say that they're all done with the task. It's just like when we get to check something off our to-do list. It feels good to be able to say it's all done. The children are no different. It also kind of outlines the expectations of what you expect and what the child can expect in their day, of what they're going to do next, and then what they're going to do later on in the day. And then it also, it kind of is very powerful because it takes the pressure off of you as a parent. It's no longer your fault that it's time to stop playing and it's time to go home, because the schedule says it's time to go home, that after we play, then we go home. And so that's kind of a nice added benefit.
And this is an example of what a picture schedule could look like, but just so you know, you can Google picture schedules. You can buy picture schedules now. When we first started doing this, everybody had to make their own, but Amazon will actually sell picture schedules. So whatever works for you, but they're very easy to make. Little Velcro, and the child can pull it off and put it in the little pocket, and it's just a great visual and physical reminder. I did this, and now the next thing is coming up.
It also is really nice because it kind of decreases the anxiety of the unknown of, what am I doing today?
Mhm.
And so it can be really helpful for that as well. And then you can also use visual supports for first then strategies. Same type of thing. It just kind of sets some clear expectations of what needs to be done before, and then before that preferred activity. So it just uses a little sequence of photos. So first we're going to clean up, and then we're going to go to the park. Again, it takes the pressure off of the caregiver because the schedule says so. So now we're going to move into some sensory strategies, things that can be used for sensory motor breaks and calm down. There are a lot of strategies listed on the next few slides. We wanted to demonstrate that there are a lot of strategies that you can use, and the ones that are listed this is not inclusive. There are a lot of other things that you can do, but we wanted to show you a lot of different strategies because we wanted to make sure that you understand that, having one or two strategies, that's not all you need. Because we like to think of it as having a toolbox of strategies, because what works one day might not work the next day. So it's good to have a lot of different ideas in your pocket so that you can, combat any any struggle that you're having. So it could be something as simple as, getting or giving a hug, or just sitting down and reading a book, or resetting in, kind of a little cozy corner or a comfort corner, taking some time to just relax and color or draw, listen to calming music, swinging, some slow, deep breathing and counting to 10, and doing some yoga. Those are all good strategies. So are things like taking a walk, wearing headphones if it's a loud environment, using a sensory bottle. You can Google that. There are lots of different sensory bottles that you can make. They just kind of give a child something to focus on. It's, kind of gives them a visual to help them calm down, actually. You can also do things like playing in a sensory bin. Google that one too. It's things like a bucket with beans or rice in it, and it gives them something they can play in. They like the feel of it. They like to fill and dump cups. They like to drive trucks in them. Those are good strategies. Using a fidget tool, something that they can hold in their hand that like moves, kind of gives them something else to focus on. And then there's always the oral things that we kind of talked a little bit about earlier, things like eating spicy foods or sucking on a lemon or chewing gum and using a chew tool that they can kind of bite down on, gives them more input. And these are kind of my favorites. These are the what we call heavy work or proprioceptive input. It's things that give you some input to your muscles and joints. You can do things like doing a wheelbarrow walk, or put all of their books on the floor and tell them to pick them up and put them up on the table. Do some animal walks, walk like a bear, jump like a frog. Can go to the park and hang or swing on monkey bars. Do a lot of running and jumping and crashing into the couch cushions, pulling and pushing something heavy, climbing up the slide. That gives you a lot of input. And then also you can even do things like put out a sled or a wagon and pull it with weight in it or another child. And then our other favorite is when in doubt, add water. Take a bath, get a drink, go to the pool, wring out a wet cloth. It gives them that pressure in their hands too. Use a water table or a sprinkler, blow bubbles, use a spray bottle. They can wet the entire, sidewalk or, and then you can even do things like take little toys and freeze them and then have them take a little dropper with warm water and melt it until they get that out. Gives them really something to focus on, and it takes some time. So that's our favorite too. Add water. And we just wanted to point out kind of the importance of a child being able to regulate themselves or co-regulate, because it's linked with a lot of lifelong skills. It lends itself to positive relationships with their family and friends, and in the future, their teachers and their bosses and their coworkers. It's linked to being healthy, both physically and mentally, and then being resilient. And then there's also a lot of evidence that there's a strong link with self-regulation to memory and attention and learning, and of course, academic achievement. And so the stakes are pretty high for helping our kids learn these skills. So the zones of regulation, this is a social emotional program that a lot of our schools use. And it's a program that's designed to foster self-regulation and emotional control. It focuses on emotional intelligence and including recognizing and identifying emotions in yourself and in others. What's nice is that there's a lot of online resources for this that anyone can access, that helps you learn how to use the zones of regulation and how you can use it in the home environment. So zones, what it does is it categorizes feelings into colors. So, there's the red zone and the green zone and the blue zone and the yellow zone. And so the red zone, that's when kids are pretty upset. They're terrified, they're angry, they're out of control, they're full of rage, or it can even be that they're super excited. The yellow zone is not quite to that level. They might be frustrated, they might be excited. There's loss of some control, they might be stressed out and anxious. The blue zone is when they're sad or tired or sick or bored and they're just moving really slowly. what we're actually really looking for is for kids to be in the green zone, being happy and focused and ready to learn. This program, what it does is it focuses on that we all feel these emotions, and that's all okay. It's just that, oh, they're natural and they're okay, but the reaction, everybody, sometimes it's not appropriate for the situation or the environment. And so that's why we say that they're all okay, because they're normal.
And especially in the school environment, we talk about that the green zone is when you're happy and you're focused and you're ready to learn. And so in our classrooms, we talk about getting back to the green zone when a child is upset. And it's important to use teachable moments to talk about feelings and zones. And when you're in the green zone, that's really when you're ready to kind of absorb those lessons. But even when we're in a yellow or red zone, we want to co-regulate, and this is a good kind of model of being able to do that. So you want to model the identification of your feelings, and give your child the words, I feel scared, I feel upset. Describe how your body feels. My body feels tight or loose or relaxed. When I'm upset, I feel, you know, maybe hot or tight. My muscles feel tight. And then talk about what you need to do to get back to the green zone, where you're more focused. So you can do it yourself when you're upset and modeling that language, I feel upset. I need to sit on the couch. I need to read a book for a few minutes. I need to play a song. I need to calm down. And then we can do this. So the more you can model this language, that's teaching your child. And then we always want the focus to be on co-regulation, because we can't teach these skills once or twice and expect a preschooler to be able to do this on their own. So we're always modeling it and we're always regulating with them. Young children are still learning the language needed for self-regulation. And so we need to be able to do that with them continually. We've had parents and teachers say, we hear them using this language. They might not be able to do it themselves. We had one parent say, yeah, my daughter is using the zones with her stuffed animals and she's pretending to be the teacher and teaching them. She's still having a lot of tantrums herself, but that it's getting through and that they're hearing it. So it takes a while, and we always need to co-regulate with them. All right. So just to kind of summarize what we have talked about before we kind of open it up to questions, all behavior is communication. A child is trying to tell you something, and then it's our job to figure out what they're trying to tell us with their behavior. Behavior management and sensory strategies go hand in hand. Sensory strategies and tools are helpful in managing behaviors, even if they are not struggling to process sensory information. Don't underestimate how important sleep is. Prevention is easier than managing challenging behaviors, so try to figure out what is instigating the behavior and head it off at the pass. Using visual supports, visual schedules, visual timers is great. Takes the pressure off of you. Model and label your feelings and use regulation strategies. But what if that doesn't work? So what if all these strategies aren't working? What if you need more help? A good starting point is your child's pediatrician. They may be able to point you in the right direction. So if there's still concerns with feeding, there are feeding therapists. Your pediatrician might be able to direct you in that direction. Sleep concerns, surprisingly, there are places that do sleep studies on children. You can go and consult with specialists in sleep. And even if there aren't medical reasons, they are there to kind of help you with different strategies for sleep as well. Still having issues with pretty significant sensory concerns, your pediatrician might refer you to an occupational therapist. There are occupational therapists that work privately and hopefully will take insurance. And there's a lot of different providers in the community that work with children on pretty significant sensory difficulties. and mental health concerns. So if these behaviors or anxiety are just to that point that we talked about earlier, where it's really driving your family's schedule, if you're really kind of avoiding things because of these behaviors or anxiety, you can look for referrals for different mental health providers. The All Health Network is a nonprofit for Douglas County and a couple other counties in the area that do sliding scale fees for mental health. And then there's Douglas County Child Find. So what we do is we do developmental evaluations for preschoolers, looking at all different areas of development, speech, motor, and behavior, social, emotional as well as learning. So if you do have concerns in those areas and wanted an evaluation of your child, we have the information here. And what we look at is if a child is showing such significant delays or difficulties that they may qualify for special education services in a preschool setting. That is, our focus is more on that educational impact. All right. Here are some references. So this will be posted and you can check out these links for just some more information around parenting and behavior and that kind of thing.
Wow. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say we're ready to open it up for questions.
Okay, great. We have one of our viewers is asking, how long does it take for a child to receive a child find assessment? As far as how many months? How long does it take for the results? And what happens after an assessment?
Yeah. How long to wait really kind of depends on the time of year. There are some times of the year that we're a little bit more backed up and some where you can get in within a couple weeks. So the first step would be to call that referral line. There's some paperwork to fill out first to kind of give us some background information and to best figure out which members of our team would need to be involved depending on those concerns. So right now, really, we're looking at just a couple weeks out. And then the evaluation itself usually takes a couple hours. We'd come to one of our evaluation rooms, which is set up as a playroom. So that takes about 2 hours. And then we would write up a report, but we would tell you kind of during that evaluation if we think that child would be kind of trending towards being eligible for special education.
And sometimes we might do an observation, like if your child is in a preschool or in a daycare, sometimes we might go do an observation there to see how they're doing interacting with other children in that type of environment. There is also one other piece that we we need to have done beforehand, and that is to have a hearing test. That is provided by the district as well. There's no fee. It just needs to be done to kind of rule that out before you come in for an evaluation.
Thanks. That sounds like a great series of steps. I am curious with the pandemic, did you see a lot of differences in sensory processing and behavior with, kids and everyone returning back to being with other people?
Actually, yes. I think we've kind of overall seen kind of an increase in first of all, behaviors, challenging behaviors, in that sensory regulation. It's probably anecdotal because we haven't done a study on it. But it does seem to be that there's some sort of connection. Kids spent a lot of time at home in a very protected type environment. They didn't have the opportunities to interact with peers and just in the community in general. And so I think that there have been some impacts on socialization,
social
on
skills.
social skills, on kind of just maybe even anxiety. I feel like we've seen an uptick in anxiety and kids that, spent a lot of time at home and now they're out in the world. And so I think there have been some definite changes since then.
Yeah, on a personal note, I feel like I enjoy running errands a whole lot less than I used to prior to the pandemic. Mostly it's just there's a lot of stimulation out in the world, and we all didn't have that on a regular basis. Going to the grocery store can be a lot of sensory input, so I think it happens to adults as well.
Yeah, and probably our anxiety is probably rubbing off a little bit too
Mhm.
on our
Yeah.
young kids for sure.
Yeah. So we have another question. How has Universal Pre-K changed the dynamic of preschools in the school district as far as a number or percent of typical, and those needing intervention?
Yeah, I think we've seen a lot of different impacts. It's getting a lot more kids into school, which is great. Um, and so for a while, I think there was a lot of kids who were in schools, and I think our numbers actually dipped a little bit until they started to come up again as far as referrals, because these are kids who hadn't been maybe in a classroom before. So I think it's helping to kind of identify some of those kids who may have maybe some speech difficulties that mom and dad didn't, because mom and dad understood them because they're with them every day. And so it's kind of getting kids maybe out into the community a little bit more, where some teachers are saying, starting to kind of, bring some of those concerns to parents, like, oh, maybe you understand them. I'm having a hard time understanding them. Let's get them evaluated and see if that's a significant need.
And so, yes, I think it's a good thing because kids are getting identified. I think more kids are
Mhm.
maybe being identified earlier, and that's kind of the purpose of early intervention is get in there, get some help so that we can all become progressively unnecessary.
Oh, I know personally, my oldest son went through Child Find and he enjoyed it so much he thought he was always going to play. So it was a very positive experience for him. Um, and it looks like we have another question. Oh yeah. Um, Someone is asking if the slides will be available. And this particular, or all of our Parent University webinars are recorded and posted on our Parent University website. So you will be able to see all of the slides from the recording. But I'm sure if you need more information, you can be in contact with Christina or Mary Beth or Child Find as a whole, and they can get you exactly what you need. And I also had a comment from one of our viewers that it looks like she also observed that after the pandemic that definitely social needs, but gross motor skills and fine motor skills were also um, something that appeared to be something that needed more assistance. So lots.
Yeah, and I do want to put in a plug for our counterparts who look at birth through age 3, so early intervention through developmental pathways. So you're hearing about preschool age kids. If you have babies, even babies through kind of toddler age, developmental pathways does evaluations for our babies, and they certainly look at motor as well as communication and social emotional needs too. So there are services from birth all the way through age 21 through between developmental pathways and the school system.
I don't know about you both, but I feel like there's a lot of adults that could use a refresher as well. I love your analogy of the bucket and how our bucket sizes can change. Definitely something I've seen. And I personally feel like I'm much more in my green zone than after watching your lovely presentation than when we started. So thank you for just bringing up all the things that we don't necessarily recognize, but are definitely affected by. So let's see if I don't think we have any other questions at this moment. So as I said, this recording will be posted on our website. You can also be in contact with me via email, and I'm happy to send you any information about this particular webinar. I don't think I mentioned it before, but April is Occupational Therapist Month. So thank you, Mary Beth, for everything you do for our kids, and of course, Christina, what you do as well.
Thank you.
And thanks to all of our viewers who attended this evening. You can refer to all of our Parent University information at DC. Let me try that again. DC. Say this a lot, but I can't seem to get it out. DC SDK12.org. And our next Parent University is planned for May, so please look for that information through our social media and emails and newsletters and any other communication you receive from us. And also wanted to say thank you to Skyridge Medical Center for their partnership with all of our Parent University webinars. So unless we have any other questions, I think we will finish out this evening's presentation. So thanks again, Mary Beth and Christina and Child Find. And we hope to talk to everyone soon. Good night.
Good night.